Game 90, Paris Saint-Germain versus Dortmund on the 7th of May 2024. Titled, When is the End of 23-24? Tonight I have the honour of a semi-final second leg of the Champions League between Paris Saint-Germain and Dortmund. The German side are one up from the first leg and surely going to be under enormous pressure by the home country side. It is the Gary Briggs studio for me, so not too far to go. And I know I won't be getting the final due to the allocations officer always considering himself for that role. But hey, who am I to argue? But during a conversation over the team in WhatsApp today, there appears to be the Euro Championships looming. Which begs a question, read this podcasty thingy. When does 2023-2024 season actually end? And where do the Euros fit into this pattern of things? Well, I decide that if you have got this far, then you deserve a medal, and I will not continue this journey after May 24 has finished. Looking at my fixtures ahead, the last game will be Olympiacos versus Fiorentina on May the 29th. So including this one tonight, just 4 to go. Huzzah, I feel all of you say. I too say huzzah, as I will have finished something for the first time in my life. Tonight's encounter brings two sides into my sphere who wouldn't normally get a second look in my life. Dortmund brings the wall and Klopp to my thoughts, and PSG brings a side owned by a country. That may be a crass assumption, but that is what hangs in my head. As I drive into work, I do something I really don't do that often, and that is play some music. Let's put it another way. When I worked on a local station, and indeed TalkSport, I never listened to the radio in the car. And as Sue, the programme controller at Jack, once said to me when I told her of my non-listening, she said, thanks for listening. Interestingly enough, when I was working for BBC Radio Oxford, myself and another presenter had to go through this do you know your audience sort of presentation. Anyway, we were sat there and the second in command at BBC Oxford was taking this presentation, and it opened up with pictures of various TV, radio, singers, celebrity faces before the person in control of the presentation asked us what they all had in common. We sort of looked at each other before turning back to, let's say, his name was Will, and then sat in silence as I had in class all those years ago, not wanting to be slated for making the wrong guess or giving the wrong answer. After a few seconds of awkward silence, Will said, they're all the same age. They're 56, and that is our target audience. They are the people we should be aiming at. When, before thinking and committing radio career suicide, I said, hey, I'm 56, and BBC Oxford doesn't appeal to me, and I wouldn't listen, as it's boring. I think that sealed my fate to a degree. 4 years later, and a 2-year stint of doing my own thing on an evening show, which was very popular, saw COVID and cuts curtail my BBC career. Did it hurt? Yes. Did I change my ways? No. Was I true to myself? Yes. Closed doors to me do piss me off. But that is the life of a maverick, as I was once called. The sports editor once said, the trouble with you, Selfie, is if we pass the ball to you, you go off and beat everyone and score. You don't pass back. Now you tell me, is that wrong if I score? Or is it wrong if I don't score? Anyway, I'd rather be cultural references coming up here, Rodney Marsh playing football, than Alan Smith, the old Arsenal forward. Anyway, back to the music I was playing. It was an old CD with hits from 1977 through to around 1983. New wave, punk, reggae and some Dexys, the Gino album. A mixture of Madness, the Stranglers, the Police, the Boomtown Rats, Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Squeeze, OMD, Tears for Fears, the Pistols, Jam and many, many more. What a time to be alive, I thought. It rolled me back into my youth, which was now painted very nicely through rose-coloured yesteryear glasses that I am now mentally wearing. Michael's Mad at Me sends me back to Brickwork College. The Jam brings to life mates of yesteryear in Rob and Will. The Pistols and any punk rock brings my middle brother to my mind as he blared out punk music out of his bedroom window as part of his anarchy at the time. I went to an Elvis Costello gig, and halfway through one of his songs, I think it was Watching the Detectives, he slipped into a Stevie Wonder number, and it was awesome. The drive-in had sent me into a somewhat hypnotic trance. I couldn't remember passing those traffic lights or any junctions at all. Good or bad, you decide. I wandered into the studio named after a legend of my club in the 80s, still thinking that life back then was a never-ending brilliant time. But I knew it wasn't, but I enjoyed the warm feeling of nostalgia. There is a sense, and this is paramount, of what I was about to do not being like real work. There were no nerves, which is worrying, but the dulcet tones from afar bring me back to the job at hand. I settle into the routine. The story is already written, and it'll all be about getting a result at the end for these two sides. The game itself, I think, is a masterclass by Dortmund. They didn't retreat and protect what they had. They were measured and tactically astute. PSG at the break were not playing well, due in no small way to the way that Dortmund were controlling the game. The scenarios for an audio broadcast meant I didn't need stats upon stats. Dortmund eventually ran out winners by 1-0 on the night and 2-0 overall, and they progressed to the final. And Kylian Mbappe, not him personally, the awaiting world's new Messi or Ronaldo, couldn't get his side over the line. I say not him because he of course is exceptional, but the footballing world is awaiting the next big thing, and he is just Kylian Mbappe. I pack up and have a little chat with the faceless voice from afar before tidying up the studio and wandering out to go home. As I turn on the engine, the CD starts up once again, but this time I immediately turn it off. Why, you may ask? Was it the fear of not seeing those traffic lights, or indeed remembering them, or anything else? No, I'll tell you why. For that short drive in, I wallowed in yesteryear and it was lovely. But I have this inbuilt fear of being happy. Not because I don't want to be, but because when I allow myself happiness, there is always something shit lurking to bring me back to reality and possible sadness. So I repel the opportunity to stave off the darkness that may come. And I suppose when I was 8 and happy, Pedo Pete destroyed me, so much so that I don't ever want that hurt to come back. It does sometimes. Situations bring it all to the fore, but I handle it and deal with it. So sat in silence, I sit with my thoughts on how it went and did I do okay. I pull up outside my house and enter like a returning hero. Haha. Notes written down for scripting up later for this poddy job. Rocco gets up from the settee lazily and stretches out. A bit of upward dog before shifting his body weight back for a little downward dog. He follows me to the kitchen where he stands staring at the back door. I open it and he goes out for a little splash and dash, and he comes back in ready for his treat for being a good boy by having a wee. It's still quite early, so we'll try this trick again about an hour when we do go to bed. I chat with my wife and we stare lazily at some banal programme before we both decide today's over and it's off to the bedroom for raucous sex with the wife and the beagle watching from pitchside. Nah, fuck it. Sleep, that's what we want. It's not quite the end of the 2023-2024 season, but it is the end of another day. Game 91, West Ham versus Luton on the 11th of May 2024, titled Weary. It is the last Saturday set of matches in the Premier League and for us TalkSport Live commentators. I have, yes you've guessed it, an early moral standing at the top of the platform on my own with the train stopping right by me victory. I sit in my usual position and play the suitcase game as we stop at Bicester Village. And again another plethora of suitcases board the London-bound choo-choo. The noise is raised more and more as people board. I am staring out of the window by the seats just in front of me, as by Wickham there are the normal gyrating groins and arses at eye level in the aisle. I'm in the world of Self is Mind, and as you may well know, that is a strange walk through doors of differing topics, somehow linked together by tenuous links. Like, as we pass Wembley Stadium, and then we pull away, the multi-storey car park at Wembley would be just too far away for me to walk to it from the stadium. Which sort of leads into Dire Straits' song So Far Away From Me, getting a reprise in my head before segueing into Dire Straits' That's Where Luton Town Find Themselves. The Hatters could all but be relegated today, or should we say the Milliners? And I don't mean James Milner, who is still playing for Brighton. Good grief, how old is he now? I remember when he first came into football at Leeds, and talking of Leeds, Rocco didn't even say goodbye to me this morning. So the mind is popping through differing and wide-ranging thoughts. Too difficult to actually get any semblance of a solid thought. I do catch the eye of one fellow traveller and think for a fleeting moment, I'm not quite that ugly, am I? before glancing briefly at my reflection in the slightly distorted window ahead of me and realising possibly I am. I am straightening up at Marylebone when alighting I bump into a fellow yellow. He is missing today's game as he's meeting some old mates in London for a few jars. He's a lively character and a bit younger than me. General banter happens as we walk towards the gates and I tease him by saying, "Out in the pool today?" He smiles ruefully and says, "No mate, I'm hung like a baby wasp." That made me cry with laughter until we parted at Marylebone and I went for a waz, and then it just made me cry. I made my way down to Costa outside Dorset Square, where as I approached the till they knew my drink and had it ready. Mr. Predictable. I sit down inside and gazed out at the world going by. And looking out, it's a little more like a scene from the film Notting Hill than the outlook from London Bridge Concourse. I wander off after my obligatory latte and gaze above the shop fronts, and after all this time I see a view I hadn't encountered before. There is a little joy at seeing this. Something I'd never seen before, and it was so very cinematic. One of those glimpsing moments you wish you had your camera there for. Into Baker Street, my short walk had started off my staccato steps as my knee had had enough for the day. Something as simple as walking. The Jubilee line was full, as it was definitely a tourist day in London, and the Shard was a jewel in the tourist crown, as it's situated near Tower Bridge and the Tower of London. I'm grateful when I finally get into the lift in the office block that houses our studios. I make my way to my booth for the afternoon and don't particularly engage really. It is that period of quietness that suddenly turns me inwards. I do though have a little sporadic chat, but generally I'm in my own little world preparing for the Irons versus Luton. There is a little issue in getting the right feed into my booth, but the technical team sorted out. I get pictures from the satellite of the London Stadium forming the Olympic Stadium, and I get a whimsy of nostalgia. Upton Park was always in my youth, instantly recognisable by the stanchions on the back of their goals. They came out from the angle of the post and bar horizontally, and with a rounded corner, 90-degree angle, dropped to the ground vertically, whereas the majority of others sloped away at around 50 degrees. This is technical, isn't it? When I played football with my middle brother at home in the front room, the underside of the keys on our upright piano in the house was a similar shape to those goals at Upton Park. And do you know, the pitches now all have box nets, or most of them do. Bayswater School in the 70s had box nets before it became the norm. So there. Team news done and open up written. The Luton relegation issues and the Irons managerial conundrum. They are the backstories ahead of the action. The game sets off and Luton take the lead. Hope springs eternal for the travelling Luton fans at the break. Could the impossible still be a reality? West Ham trudge off, none more so than David Moyes. Can he turn it around for the home fans to go out in their final home match of the season with a win? And also, if rumours are to be believed, go out in his final match in charge at home with a win? Well, the answer was yes, and West Ham duly run out 3-1 winners, and fairly comfortably, I might add. Rob Edwards and the Luton team went over to the Luton fans and applauded a season which wasn't over in terms of games, but was almost over in terms of relegation. It was almost like a gesture of, we actually did better than most people thought. I bid farewell to some of the commentators not involved on the final day for the summer and head out into London for the jaunt home. I arrive at Marylebone and head for the Biston North train bound for Birmingham. I grab a seat, check the local scores and the match reports of the match I just covered, watch a couple of horse races on the phone, lose a few pounds, if only weight would shift that quick, not just the sterling, before settling back and looking out of the window. A nice powder blue sky with white clouds, the sun shining down and caressing the hills and the fields, cattle just munching on the grass. The world really is quite beautifully simple. Off the train and picked up. The landscape home changes to being fettered with shops or services or cars. My wife, as is her normal behaviour behind the wheel, in full road rage at anyone's mistakes that impinge on her drive home. But can I tell her to relax? No. A quick glance over my shoulder to Rocco, and we just look at each other hoping for a safe passage home. I've sat in my own mind not talking for far too long now, and I think everyone who maybe performs will tell you there is always a little post-show blues that sets in. When we settle down for the evening, the 1% Club is on the TV. I'm not sure if it's a repeat or not, but my wife is flying, doing really well, getting all the answers. Now this is a quiz which is mental, but my mind is currently struggling to add 2 plus 2. But I stare at the telly before heading to bed. It could be a long summer, as cleaning out the garden shed doesn't feel as appetising as being a commentator.